Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We'd like to get started soon. Thank you all for braving the elements to be here with us this afternoon. My name is Andrew Samwick, and I'm a professor of economics and the director of the Nelson A. Rockefeller Center here at Dartmouth. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this year's Brooks Family Lecture, Bringing America Together, presented by Arthur Brooks, no relation. Dr. Brooks is best known as the president of the American Enterprise Institute. The Brooks Family Lecture was established in 1990 by a gift from Dexter Brooks, a member of the Dartmouth class of 1947 and the Tuck School class of 1949, who had a successful career in publishing and real estate. The Brooks Family Lecture has been a mainstay of Rockefeller Center programming, including today as we continue our year-long celebrations of the Rockefeller Center's 35th anniversary. The Brooks Family Lecture promotes balanced discussions of national and international issues. My files say that the first Brooks Family Lecturer was George Soros, commenting on the 1989 revolution, which was a wave of uprisings in Central and Eastern Europe, still in progress at the time of that lecture, that signaled the end of communist rule in that area. I completed my undergraduate degree in 1989. Seeing the bold efforts of the revolutionaries and the toppling of autocratic regimes throughout the region filled me and my generation with a sense of optimism and hope for freedom and democracy as I moved on to my graduate school and then my professional life. Fast forward 3 decades to the present, and you will still find me hopeful. Hope is a state of mind, but considerably less optimistic, a statement about probabilities. And the most surprising turn of event is that the loss of optimism is based as much on what has happened inside of America, the beacon for that revolutionary wave, as it has depended on goings-on in other parts of the world. America is not what it was, and the diminution is due more to our own internal struggles than to any threat beyond our borders. I'm not alone in my assessment. No matter what our political views, few people believe our country is as united as it should be, whether in media, in politics, or almost anywhere else in what we call the civic sphere. We all recognize that the country is increasingly defined by a culture of contempt, in which people treat others with whom they disagree as defective or worthless or some other pejorative. This afternoon, Dr. Brooks will argue that even within this distressing reality, there lies an opportunity for our nation. He will address the divisions that plague America and articulate a set of strategies to help us disagree better, forge a new model of aspirational leadership, and unite the country. Dr. Brooks is the president of the American Enterprise Institute for Public Policy Research, a private, nonpartisan, not-for-profit institution dedicated to research and education on issues of government, politics, economics, and social welfare. Its mission is to defend the principles and improve the institutions of American freedom and democratic capitalism. Dr. Brooks became president of AEI in 2009, where he is also the Beth and Ravenel Curry Scholar in Free Enterprise. Before becoming president of AEI in 2009, Dr. Brooks was the Louis A. Bantle Professor of Business and Government at Syracuse University, where he taught economics and social entrepreneurship. He holds a PhD and an MPhil in policy analysis from the Pardee Rand Graduate School. Prior to his work in academia and public policy, he spent 12 years as a classical musician in the United States and Spain. He is a columnist for the Washington Post, host of the podcast The Arthur Brooks Show, and the best-selling author of 11 books and dozens of articles on topics including the role of government, economic opportunity, happiness, and the morality of free enterprise. His latest book, Love Your Enemies, it's got a great subtitle, Love Your Enemies, How Decent People Can Save America from the Culture of Contempt, will be released this spring. This summer, he will join the faculty at Harvard with appointments in both the schools of government and business. Before he takes the stage, we are delighted to share with you a trailer for The Pursuit. This feature-length film is the culmination of 3 years of research, conversations, and travel across 3 continents to seek an answer to the question, how can we lift up the world? Starting with those at the margins of society. Along the way, it reveals the secrets to not only material progress for the least fortunate, but also greater happiness for all people. The film will be digitally released in early May, and for more information on the film and screenings, please visit www.thepursuitmovie.com. Without further ado, here is Arthur Brooks in The Pursuit.
I don't claim to have all the answers, but the answers that I've found have truly changed my life.
Arthur Brooks, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's an honor to be here and with all of you. Poverty is the thing I care about the most. I think that the suspicion that people have about capitalism comes because they think people like me don't believe in morals and they don't believe in any regulation at all, and that's not true. Here's the great irony of our times. People in the wealthiest countries in the world are increasingly turning against the very system that's lifted us out of poverty.
If India had not adopted economic reforms, there would be 375 million poor people more in the country today.
Whatever we got to do to get the American dream, honestly, then that's what we're going to do, you know?
The American dream is always predicated on you work hard, you get the right grades, you go to the right schools, and a lot of time, it doesn't work that way.
You know, coal goes away. What are we going to do? They didn't think about that.
They didn't expect it.
They didn't expect it, you know.
2 billion people have been pulled out of starvation level poverty. What did that?
Forget per capita GDP. We didn't even have per capita hope. And the markets have given us per capita hope.
The real poverty exists when a young man or a young woman grows up with no desire. That's poverty, man.
Everyone wants happy life, do not want suffering. You are showing genuine interest, not only money matter, but more wider perspective. I really very much appreciate.
Thank you, Your Holiness. The point of the American experience is basically a moral consensus that our society should push opportunity to the people who need it the most. Thank you very much. What an honor it is to be here in Dartmouth. Wait for the screen to go up here. Those of you who are interested in seeing that movie in its entirety, there's a lot of opportunities to do it. It's a project that has been long in the making. We'll be doing screenings all over the United States, and if you are interested in one here, here in Hanover, it's just a question of letting us know, and we have an organization that does all the work. We'll have about 100 or 200 screenings around the United States. And then it'll be on Netflix come summer. So I hope you enjoy it. I certainly enjoyed making it. It was a big adventure. And what an honor it is for me to be here tonight. You're the hardcores. I mean, it's snowing out there, and you're here anyway, and I really appreciate it. I know that, look, in New Hampshire, this is child's play. I lived in Syracuse for a long time, and I know that the people who really are committed, they show up to this type of thing. So thank you so very much. And thank you, Andrew, for that gracious introduction. I appreciate it. You know, you heard that I'm the president of the American Enterprise Institute. Fundamentally, I'm an academic, and I spent a lot of I spent years at Syracuse University. I will be going back into academia next summer. The thing that I love about think tanks, however, is that we're dedicated in Washington, D.C. I mean, some are on the right, some are on the left, but what they all have in common is looking for big, old problems that people can't solve and trying to find an epiphany to solve them in new ways. That's kind of the research protocol, things that people are sort of cracking their heads against and can't solve them. We're looking for the new angle to look at these things in a new way. And everybody in here, you know that all the big epiphanies in your life have come by thinking about old problems in new ways. I mean, you can think about it in your schoolwork or if you've started a business. I mean, it's certainly true for, I mean, I just have getting to know the Brooks family here. By the way, not related as far as we know, but I mean, how many Brookses can there be? And still, my incredible appreciation. I was actually wondering whether or not you have to find somebody named Brooks to be in the Brooks lecture. My friend David Brooks has done it, as a matter of fact. Next, it'll be Mel Brooks next year. He's going to fill the hall, man, whether it's snowing or not. If you're successful in business, you're successful in any part of your life, you know that the biggest breakthroughs that you've had are when you have a different way of thinking about an old problem. I had this experience. I was trying to think of an example of this just in everyday life, and we were talking beforehand about my son. I have 3 kids, and my middle son, who is a farmer in Idaho. He didn't go to college. He hasn't gone to college yet, at least. And he 3 years ago, when he was still in high school, my wife Esther and I were having this really bad parent-teacher conference. I mean, some of you who are students, how many of you are students, by the way? Some of you did this to your parents, so call your mother and apologize. And really bad parent-teacher conference. It was about grades. It was a grades problem, right? And it was an old problem, ongoing old problem, okay? And this is what's going to lead to graduation. What does it mean? And afterward, my wife and I were very stressed out. We were in the car, we weren't talking. And finally, she says, see, my wife's from Barcelona. She's an optimist. And she says, we need to think about this old problem in a brand new way. And I said, I'm all ears, sweetheart, because she says, at least we know he's not cheating. So that's the spirit in which I want to talk about what's becoming an old problem and an ongoing issue in America today. I want to talk not about the fact that left-wing politics is ascendant or right-wing politics is ascendant, or that one side is right and one side is wrong. I'm not going to tell you what you should think about politics. I'm going to regret with you how we talk to each other in politics in America today. Because I'm going to make the proposition that we can't make progress as a country and our democracy is in peril as long as we continue to try to vanquish one side of the other utterly, and we treat each other the way that we've been treating each other, with hatred and disrespect. But I'm going to do more than that. I'm going to tell you how I think each of us can be an agent in fixing that. No matter what your sphere of influence is, whether you run a think tank like I do, or you're a professor at Dartmouth College, or whether you basically just know your neighbors, how you can actually be an agent for change and make the country better. Now, once again, I'm not going to try to convince you of my politics. You don't care what my politics are, and you shouldn't. I'm going to tell you that if we do the stuff that I'm talking about, each of us can be an agent for positive change. That's my proposition tonight. Now, it's a big promise, right? So let's see. Now, I want to tell you when I first had this creeping sensation that we were in trouble as a country in the way we talk to each other politically. It actually was a moment that I remember. It was here in New Hampshire in 2014. I was in Manchester, New Hampshire, and I was at a conservative activist conference. Why? Because this is what I do for a living. I talk to people. When you're the president of a think tank, there's actually not that much thinking in tanks. It's mostly traveling around and talking to people. You raise money and you give ideas, share ideas. It's great. It's the best life ever. I can do 175 speeches a year. I get to talk, and it's across the political spectrum, by the way. I go on college campuses that are extremely left-wing sometimes, and conservative activist events like this one in Manchester. Okay, 700 conservative activists. Super into it, three-cornered hats, the whole deal. Okay, and they love their country, and they're really fired up, right? Okay, now here's the interesting thing about this event. It was all politicians except me. Furthermore, everybody was running for president in 2016 except me. It's like a Cecil B. DeMille production, a cast of thousands kind of thing. It's like candidate, 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 me. Candidate, 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 right? So I was kind of the odd man out in this thing. And I come a little bit early, just get an idea what people are saying. And politicians were doing what politicians always do. They were throwing raw stakes out into the crowd, right? And they were just firing the crowd up about how stupid the other side are, how evil the other side are, how utterly wrong-headed the other side is, right? Why? Because, politicians are trying to fire up their side. You're not trying to challenge the audience. They're trying to get enthusiasm out of the audience. That's what they always do. It doesn't matter if they're right or left. That's what they do, okay? Watch a rally. So I was standing backstage, and I was thinking to myself, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? I mean, look, I've got my opinions, and you have yours, but what's your opportunity under the circumstances? And the opportunity is make it better. Improve this situation in some way. Look, I don't have to run for election. I don't have to get elected to anything ever. I don't have to get anybody's votes. It's an incredible privilege. So what am I going to say? So I made a little plan, right? And we're talking about free market economics and foreign policy, and my own politics are center-right. So most people in the audience I'm going to agree with, right? I'm going to talk about deregulation and taxes, et cetera, et cetera. But here's my plan. I got in the middle of my speech and I stopped and I said, okay, my friends, we're talking about policy issues and I am saying things with which you are mostly in agreement, but I want you to think about right now the people who don't agree with us and they're not here. They're political progressives. And I want you to remember that they're not stupid and they're not evil. They're simply Americans who disagree with us. Now, I knew it wasn't going to be an applause line. But this lady, she says, I think they're stupid and evil. Now, it's kind of a joke. You know, it wasn't supposed to repudiate me or it wasn't an insult to me at all. I didn't take it as such. But you know what I thought of? I thought of Seattle. Why? Because it's my hometown. You know, I grew up in Seattle, Washington. My mother was an artist and my father was a math professor. What do you think their politics were? I mean, when you say you're from a liberal family in Seattle, that's actually redundant. So when that lady said that, she was insulting my family. And I took it personally. I didn't get mad, but it made me, because these are these moments of clarity that you get sometimes, moral clarity. I remember when I was a kid, my dad used to say, the mark of moral courage isn't standing up to the other side. That's super easy, standing up to the other side. The mark of moral courage is standing up to people on your own side on behalf of people on the other side, right? When was the last time you did that? See, we're in a moment in America where we're being fired up constantly by leaders to stand up to the other side and insult them. That's not a mark of moral courage. That's a moral problem. That is actually the problem we need to solve. When people try to diagnose it, they'll often say, we have a civility problem, or that we have a tolerance problem, right? We need more civility in America, we need more tolerance. That's actually wrong. Those are garbage standards. If I tell you, you know, my wife and I, we're civil to each other, you'd be like, ugh, you need some counseling, man. Or, you know, I'm president of the American Enterprise Institute, and I think that my staff, they tolerate me. It's like, whoa, bad situation, right? You don't want civility and tolerance, not high enough. We need something better for a country like this. We need love. We need to love each other. Impossible, right? Well, let's think about it a little bit. People often say that in the current situation, like what I saw in New Hampshire, or what you can see on any cable channel right now when you turn it on, is angry politics. People are angry all the time, right? That's actually incorrect. Anger is not inherently politically problematic. Inherently, it's not problematic for any relationship, as a matter of fact. There's a lot of good data that show that anger is uncorrelated among married couples with separation and divorce. Fighting doesn't lead to separation and divorce. What leads to separation and divorce? I asked a friend of mine, his name is John Gottman. He's a psychologist at the University of Washington in Seattle. He runs the Gottman Marriage Laboratory. This guy has brought thousands of couples together that were on the brink of divorce. The guy's a hero in my book. Why? Because anybody who brings families together so they don't separate is doing a great thing. That's the strength of any society, is intact families. So John Gottman, with his wife Julie, they have this thing that they can do where they can have a couple that's quarreling. It's in their laboratory. He can interview them for an hour, and after just 1 hour asking them some simple questions, he can predict with 97% accuracy if they will be divorced within 3 years. How does he know? If those of you who are married, you want to know. Eye rolling. The ultimate sign, not of anger, but of contempt. Contempt, as Andrew mentioned before, is the conviction of the utter worthlessness of another human being. When you show somebody contempt with sarcastic humor, with derision, eye rolling, dismissal, you get a permanent enemy. Anger says, I care about what you think. Contempt says, you personally are not worth caring about. That's how you get somebody to be permanently against you in your point of view. It's an inherently self-defeating kind of expression. And yet that's of course what couples are doing all the time who are on their way to divorce court. And that's what we're doing in America all the time. We're like a dysfunctional couple in the United States today. Of course we have disagreements. We've always had disagreements. But to the extent to which we treat each other with contempt because of these disagreements, we pull the country further apart. Now, why do we do it? Right? I mean, you're not a bad person, I'm not a bad person, and yet I can think of examples in which I treated people with contempt. Look, I'm on social media. That's a contempt machine. Twitter, I mean, those of you who are not on it, congratulations. Those of you who are, you understand. It's where you say anything political and people are attacking you all over the place anonymously and treating you with utter contempt. You turn on cable television, you listen to popular politicians today, and it's nothing more than expressions of contempt. Why is it? Why do we do this? Well, to begin with, there is a contempt industrial complex in this country. People are getting famous and powerful and rich by setting you against your neighbors. Now, there's a very interesting poll I saw 2 weeks ago, as a matter of fact, pretty new. No, a little bit longer ago than that. That shows that 93% of Americans say they hate how divided we've become as a country. Okay? In other words, they actually don't hate their neighbors and don't like our country being driven apart. They disagree. I mean, strong opinions are great. Strong opinions are the basis of a free society. That's what a competition of ideas is all about. But hating your neighbors over it, that's not functional. Here's the interesting part. 7%, 93% hate it. 7% don't. Who are they? They're the people who are invested in it. People who are getting rewards from actually turning neighbor against neighbor, American against American, compatriot against compatriot. These people are manipulating this country, are brutalizing this country, are terrorizing this country, terrorizing us. So one of the things I'm going to talk about later is how to stand up to them. And that's part of my strategy and part of how all of us can be in this fight. Again, I'm not going to ask you to agree, but I will ask you to consider the expressions of contempt that you're encouraged to display toward your neighbors. Okay, so that's the first part of what's going on here, that we have this big contempt problem. Why do the rest of us do this if we're not in the 7%? The answer is it's a habit. It's just a habit, simple habit of expression. That's what we hear, that's what we see, that's what we do. Okay, now, you see, somebody says something you think is really wrong-headed politically, and you roll your eyes. You found yourself doing it, right? That is hugely damaging to other people. You just don't know it because you're so used to it. Habits happen all the time, and they can be extremely damaging and self-reinforcing. I'm going to give you one tiny little science lesson on the neuropsychology of habit formation. Habits are formed and reinforced in a part of the brain called the nucleus accumbens. The nucleus accumbens is about the size of a walnut. It's in the very center of your brain. It was evolved more than 1 million years ago. We think that our ideas and our expressions and the things that we say are processed by the medial prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain right behind your forehead. That is true for the most part, but when you have a habit, including a habit of speech or a habit of expression, it's bypassing your prefrontal cortex. It's going straight through the nucleus accumbens. The nucleus accumbens is a reward center. So when you do something that feels sort of satisfying, it lights up that little brain center, and you start using that automatically without thinking about it. That's how all bad habits work. When you're used to saying something, doing something, smoking, whatever, your nucleus accumbens is driving your behavior. Okay, so how do you break a bad habit? Any bad habit? The answer is you got to reprogram the nucleus accumbens. And the way you do that is when you have the impulse to do something that's deleterious with which you have a habit, you stop and you do something else. You have to substitute for it. When somebody says, just stop doing something, if it's a habit, that's terrible advice, can't be done. On the other hand, you have to say, every time you want to do X, stop and do Y instead, and you will reprogram your brain, okay? So, years ago, you heard that, I used to make my living as a classical musician. For years and years, for 12 years, I was a classical French horn player. And I did what most musicians do. I smoked, right? And I didn't want to be a smoker. I mean, it's funny, the people who smoke cigarettes, almost all of them don't want to, right? It's the for-profit brand that they give the most business to but hate, right? These days, the for-profit brand we hate the most but use the most is like United Airlines or Twitter or something like that. But it was like Marlboro cigarettes back in the day. How do I get off the smokes? And I got the advice Every time you want to smoke, do something else. So I started drinking. Anyway, so if I have this habit of contempt, if you have this habit of contempt, what do you do every time you feel it? Somebody says something you disagree with. Somebody makes a snarky comment. Somebody insults you, whatever. You feel it coming. What do? I wanted advice. So when I was shooting that film that you just saw the trailer for just now, you saw that I was with the Dalai Lama at the end of it. And I asked the Dalai Lama, we've been friends for a long time, for 6.5 years. We've been working together. We've written together in the New York Times. We're working on a book. We've done conferences. I've interviewed him a bunch of times in the United States. And every 6 months to a year, I see him at his home in Dharamsala in the Himalayan foothills in northern India. That's where we were on that film. So we were making that. He's the wisest man I know. And I said, Your Holiness, puzzling through this, I said, what should I do when I feel contempt? And he said, you should practice warm-heartedness. And I thought, you got anything else? Because that sounds kind of weak to me. Practice warm-heartedness. But then I thought about it a little bit more. Those of you who don't know anything about the Dalai Lama, he's the leader of the Tibetan people, and he's the world's most respected religious figure who's alive today. The Dalai Lama also has been the leader of the Tibetan Buddhists since he was sort of found as the Dalai Lama when he was a kid. And he was exiled by the communist Chinese when they rolled through Tibet when he was a teenager more than 6 decades ago. I mean, it's an amazing story where the communist Chinese, the largest standing army, brutal aggression, this is always what tyrants do. As they roll through, they victimize the weak. These are pacifists. They don't even know how to use guns. But what did they have? There were 6 million Tibetans living in this huge landmass that just happens to control the headwaters of all the Chinese rivers. It's resources, man. And so the Chinese roll through Tibet, force out the Dalai Lama into exile to be disappeared, to be forgotten forever. Right? And what happens? Over the next 60 years, he becomes the world's most respected figure in the religious world. How did he do it? With warm-heartedness. He told me that he starts every day praying for the Chinese leaders. Not that they'll give him back his homeland, but that they will live good and happy lives. Why do I bring that up? Because that's not weak. That's actually pure, raw strength. Answering somebody's contempt with warm-heartedness, answering somebody's hate with love is the hardest thing that you can do. It's the sign of a truly strong person. Answering hate with hate, that's what weak people do. Answering contempt with more contempt, that's what weak people do. That's what people who are stimulated and respond without any thought. But if you want to be tough, like the Dalai Lama, answering contempt with warm-heartedness, that's the way to do it. All right. So I thought, great advice, great advice. He always gives me great advice. So then I asked him, how? Because that's the tricky question, right? It's one thing to say, be nice to people who hate you. Something else to know how to do it. And here's the advice he gave me. He said, think of a time when you answered contempt with warm-heartedness. Right? Just think about a time you did that. And then remember the circumstances. Remember how you felt. And go for that feeling again. Recreate that feeling every time. It's a very sound psychological technique, by the way. The idea of recreating a pleasant feeling. It's getting yourself in the zone of that. But I had to remember a time when I had inadvertently treated somebody's contempt with warm-heartedness. Tricky. So I want to tell you, so I went back to my little room, by the way. When I'm in Dharamsala, I have this little room, this just decorated Tibetan. It's just beautiful. And I meditated on it and thought about it. And I remembered a time when I answered contempt with warm-heartedness inadvertently. And I want to share it with you, not because I want you to have my story to use, but because I want you to come up with yours. And this might help stimulate your memory. So I'm in Dharamsala thinking about this, and I remember a thing that happened to me in 2006. Now, in 2006, I was the happiest person in the world. I was a college professor, the world's greatest job. I was beavering away in relative professorial obscurity. I was teaching my students who were phenomenal, my graduate students at Syracuse. I was writing books that nobody ever read because they were boring, but I liked it. I liked it a lot. And suddenly, weird thing happened, my life changed overnight. Why? Because I wrote this really boring academic book with lots of numbers and charts and graphs, and it hit the news cycle in just the right way, and it started selling hundreds of copies a day. This is not what I expected. I expected it to sell a couple thousand copies total. And suddenly, I mean, it was about charitable giving. It was a book about who gives to charity and who thinks they give to charity. And had a big angle on religious people versus secular people and Democrats versus Republicans. And it was kind of an interesting result that was sort of unexpected. And so a few famous people talked about it, and it got in the newspapers. And pretty soon I was on TV every day, and my life changed. Literally, my life has never been the same ever since. I wasn't ready for this. But here's the weird part. I started to hear from total strangers. Because when you have a best-selling book, people read the book and they feel like they know you. And if they like the book, they tell you, and they like you. And if they don't like the book, they tell you that too, and they don't like you as a person. So I'm getting anonymous or just email from hundreds, thousands of people because my email was available on the university website. It's very easy to get. Universities don't do this now, but back in those days, directory. Everybody's email is publicly available. So I'm hearing from all these strangers all the time. I love your book, hate your book, whatever. A few weeks after the book comes out, I get an email from a guy in Texas. Dear Professor Brooks, you are a right-wing fraud. It's like, whoa. It's like a very unpromising beginning to an email. But I keep reading, because I'm a good sport. And I notice that this email is like 5,000 words long. It's going to take me 20 minutes to read. And it's going into incredible detail. This guy is going through every chart, every graph, every fact, every statement, every assertion in my book and refuting it. But with detail. I mean, the columns in table 3.1 are reversed, you idiot. Stuff like that. I mean, it's very insulting. And I'm 15 minutes into this email, and I started weirdly becoming conscious of my thought process. And here's what I was thinking the whole time. He read my book. And you know, I was filled with gratitude. Super weird, right? Why? Because it took me 2 years to write that book. And that guy read the whole thing. Every word. So I decided, you know, I'm going to write back to him and tell him what's written on my heart. I got nothing to lose. I don't know him. Dear so-and-so, took me 2 years to write that book. You read every word of it. I'm so grateful to you for doing that. I just wanted to tell you, thank you. Send. Then I go back to work. I mean, I'm working on a data set or something technical. And 15 minutes later, his response pops back up. Ding. I'm like, oh, it's that guy again. He's going to be really mad or something. I don't know. I open up his email. Here's what it says. Dear Professor Brooks, next time you're in Texas, if you want to get some dinner, give me a call. Huh. Enemy to friend in just a few words. What happened? The answer is I accidentally changed his heart because I answered his contempt with warm-heartedness. He was expecting, well, first of all, when you write to somebody who's got a book on the bestseller list, you don't think they're actually going to read it. You're doing it for your own self-expression, right? And then you find out that they read it. What are they going to do? If they write you back, which they probably won't, they're going to say, well, you're an idiot too. You're a bigger imbecile than I am, or something, right? That's how people react to each other. And I wrote back and I said just kind of what I thought, because it was true. Thank you. Thank you for reading my book. It's so awesome that you read my book. And he's like, wow, that's a real guy. And that guy's treating me with kindness. And he decided, no, by the way, he didn't decide he liked my book. I'm sure he completely still disagreed with everything I wrote in the book. But he decided he liked me. That's the contempt killer. That's a big epiphany because that's pure power. That's also an opportunity. That is what we can do. Each one of us can do. Look, you're going to face contempt. I'm going to talk more about this in a second. But you can, and America can, turn this thing around. You don't have to convince anybody else of your politics. We don't have to have just one political point of view, but each of us can stand up to contempt and do what our hearts truly desire. That's the secret. Okay, now, I got to tell you how, a little bit better than that. Because, you know, I'm an academic, and I'm going to have to give you some homework. So if you want to do this in your life, and you want to make the country better, I'm going to give you 3 pieces of advice. No. I'm going to give you 3 assignments. And if you follow these 3 assignments, you're going to have success and be happier, guaranteed. Okay, so here's your homework assignment number 1. Actually, let me start with homework assignment number 0, which is not your homework. Agree more. That's wrong. You need to hold your opinions and hold them well and be informed and hold them fast. Why? Because you know what the most mediocre society is like? It's one in which everybody agrees. It's boring, it's stagnant. Disagreement has another name. It's called the competition of ideas, and it's fundamental to a free society. The competition of ideas requires that we have different point of views, different perspectives, and that we engage each other. Competition is one of the great cultural and philosophical epiphanies, largely dominant and introduced by the United States. You know perfectly well that competition in sports is what makes it interesting. You love competition in politics, it's called democracy. Competition in economics is called the free enterprise system, which has lifted billions of people out of poverty since I was a child. And in the world of an economy of ideas, is the competition of ideas that actually makes us excellent. So don't agree, okay? Assignment number 1, or 0, don't agree, okay? Hold your opinions. Here's the real first assignment. Think about somebody, okay, who's firing up this country and profiting from making us hate each other. Right? Think about a public figure, get him in your head, or her, who's making us hate each other more every day. Right? Who's getting rich from it, getting famous from it, getting powerful from it. Okay? Got a person in your head? That's the wrong person. Why? Because the person in your head right now is somebody you disagree with. That person has no power over you. Now think of somebody who's doing that you agree with. Okay? And there's somebody, all of you, me too. Now make a list. Here's assignment number 1. Make a list of all the people you agree with who are getting rich by setting American against American. Okay? Make a list, and now cross them off your list. Turn them off. Stop reading that columnist. Stop watching that show. You don't need it. It's not telling you something you didn't know. It's just scratching at a little rash. And it's making you into a worse person. Furthermore, you're doing that person's bidding. Why should you make somebody more powerful and rich and famous in this country? What we need is come together. We don't need being pulled apart. Certainly not for somebody else's career. That's assignment number 1. Turn them off. Assignment number 2. Go find contempt and bring it to you. Okay, now, usually when there's something terrible and unpleasant, you should avoid it. Right? But that's not the case in this situation. I was talking to some missionaries at one point, and missionaries, they have a lot of my respect and my admiration because they have a job that's filled with rejection. It's a really hard job. Nobody ever says, hey, there's missionaries on the porch, great day. There's always like, they're hiding behind the curtains like, pretend we're not home, right? Nobody wants missionaries to knock on their door, ever, right? Unless they already have the faith, whatever faith that happens to be, right? In which case, they don't need the missionaries. So if you want to be a missionary with no rejection, you got to get another line of work. You're all about rejection because you're trying to go where people need your faith, according to your point of view, right? Okay, that's an ironclad principle, but it's not just a religious principle. It's a principle about how to lift people up. If you agree with me, the country needs to come together, and that warm-heartedness should beat contempt, you need to go where people don't have the truth. And the only place to do that is going to look for contempt. Now, there's one other side benefit. Remember, you might or might not change people's hearts. You will change yours. You will change yours. And that will make you happier and better. That's a guarantee that you're going to be a happier person if you do this. That's why you really want it. But you have to go find the problem. Go looking for the problem. How are you going to do that? I have 2 suggestions. Suggestion number 1 on how to find contempt and embrace it so that you can be happier and maybe change their hearts too. Number 1 is to get a wider circle of friends. One of the most alarming trends in American society today is that we've been able to silo ourselves socially in ways that we weren't able to do in the past. I mean, a lot of you who are my age, 50 or older, you grew up in an area where there was Democrats and Republicans and people of different economic classes, and we've been very, very good at not seeing anybody except people just like us. And you think, well, yeah, I go to college. Well, guess what? Colleges are the same way. Colleges tend to be hugely, stultifyingly insular. In politics, there's not very much diversity of opinion in most colleges. You don't have to hear things you disagree with. Some colleges, not Dartmouth, thank God, some colleges are actually basically shutting down different points of view so that people are not exposed to dangerous or damaging or offensive concepts, which of course is crazy in the competition of ideas to do that sort of thing. We also can silo our news feeds. We can make sure that our social media only tells us stuff that we already believe. There's a natural tendency to do that because it's the path of least ideological resistance, isn't it? That's a mistake. Go out and find people who are less like you and think less like you. Make a bigger group of friends. It's hard to do. Hard to do, but it's really, really worth doing unless what you want to do is never to get stronger, never to get better, and never have this opportunity to get happier. How do you do that? Well, you know how to do that. Go places where you're not invited, where people don't expect you. Say things that people aren't used to. And make sure you always treat people with love and treat people with respect, notwithstanding how they treat you. Second is there's a principle for those of you who are involved in social media, is to apply what John Gottman, remember the marriage guy I talked about a little bit earlier? What John Gottman assigns to his quarreling couples is called the 5-to-1 rule. I love this. So it turns out that when couples are really quarreling and they might get divorced, they have terrible communication habits. They can't think of anything except negative, criticizing things to say to each other. When you're first in love, you can't think of anything to criticize about your partner. You can't think of anything. It's like, she's perfect, man. But then when you're on your way to divorce court, John Gottman says you can't think of anything except criticisms. Well, that's a big problem because criticism brings criticism and it's negativity all the time. So John Gottman literally makes his couples walk around with notepads, okay? And they have the 5-to-1 rule, which is when you want to criticize your partner, you have to say 5 loving things first. That's the 5-to-1 rule. So it's like, oh man, I can't believe she forgot to pick me up again. All right, well, okay, before I get to that, I want you to know, I think you look beautiful right now. And I want you to know, I just appreciate what you did yesterday. And I want you to know, I love your mother. Forget that. And and here's the weird thing that John Gottman finds. You get to the end of the 5 beautiful things, you forget the criticism. Do the 5, forget the 1. That's the bottom line. Okay, here's the rule for all of us who are involved in social media. You have to have 5 beautiful, positive, affirming, complimentary things before you can say anything negative or criticizing on social media. Do 5-to-1. Can you live up to the 5-to-1 rule? It's actually really super hard. Because if your thing is just like feeding back on dumb ideas, you're going to be 1-to-5 or 1-to-10. You're going to be going the wrong direction on this. Do the 5-to-1 rule. You will change your own personality on social media, and you'll be a happier person, and people will see you in a different way. Will you lose followers? Yeah, probably. That's okay, too. That's the way you want to lose them. Go out and find contempt and embrace it, because it's your opportunity to be happier and make other people happier, too. Okay. Here's the last one. Here's your last piece of homework. This is real specific. Express gratitude. Now, you note that my guy in Texas, by the way, I never met that guy in Texas because, if I actually took him up on his invitation, I would probably be chained to a pipe in his basement in Dallas right now or something like that, right? I know, it's like a Craigslist joke, but anyway, what changed that interaction, the expression of warm-heartedness specifically, was when I said, thank you, I'm so grateful to you. It was the expression of gratitude. Psychologists will tell you that gratitude is the contempt killer. It makes contempt just wither on contact. It's pretty much impossible unless you're a sociopath to hate somebody who's sincerely expressing thanks to you. So express more gratitude. And by the way, it's the best single way to give you a better life. And I got evidence to that. There's this really kind of cool study from the University of California, Santa Barbara. These psychologists, they took groups of undergraduates and they broke them treatment and control by random assignment into 2 groups, okay? The first group, they had to make a list of current events, like stuff that's in the news. 5 things, the 5 top things that are in the news. The second group, the treatment group, they had to make the 5 top things that they were grateful for in their lives, okay? They make the list on Sunday. Every day, at the end of the day, they have to look at their list for 5 minutes and think about it, and every Sunday they have to update the list. At the end of 10 weeks, the gratitude listers, these are randomly assigned, the gratitude listers are 25% happier than the current events listers by self-judgment before and after on their happiness. That's free, my friends. You actually don't have an excuse not to be listing the things that you're grateful for. Okay? That's just how powerful gratitude is for improving your life. It's also incredibly powerful at making sure that other people treat you in a different way. Why? Why? Not just because of how it affects them, but because of how it affects you in the way that you deal with them. There's this book that everybody here who's over 40 has read, and everybody under 30 hasn't, but should. It's actually the Bible of self-help. It's called How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. It sounds so cheesy, like a way to bend people to your will. It's not. It's a guide to ethical, courageous, moral living in the way that you treat others. It's a beautiful book, and if you haven't read it in a long time, read it again. Dale Carnegie. And it's a very simple book. What Dale Carnegie does is he travels all around the United States. So he was writing it in the 20s and 30s. He published it in 1936. And he asks the most famous, powerful, or successful people just their secrets to how they live their lives. It's very simple research design, right? Those of us who are social scientists today, we have all kinds of problems with that, right? But it's simple and it's nice. So Dale Carnegie, at one point in the book, he goes to a magician in New York named Howard Thurston. Okay? Howard Thurston at the time was known as the world's greatest performer. Right? He'd been doing the same tricks for 40 years, like 8 shows a week, rabbits out of hats and card tricks, and he's still known as the world's greatest performer. So Dale Carnegie, he wants to know not what kind of magic does he do, but how can he still be the world's greatest performer after doing it, like he's in New York, he's on Broadway. How come he doesn't just like, oh, look at these rubes from the Midwest, okay, doing the tricks and I'm out of here, right? No. Why is he known to be such a beloved performer? So he goes to see Howard Thurston's show and he's watching. And he notices that Howard Thurston is completely into it. He loves the audience. He's done it time after time, but he's so wound up. He's so geared into how the audience is feeling and seeing. So afterward, Dale Carnegie goes back to his dressing room and says, Mr. Thurston, I figured it out. I understand why you're the world's greatest performer. It's because of your relationship to the audience. But here's what I want to know. How do you do it after 40 years? He says, oh, it's simple. He says, it's simple. Before I go out on stage, I read a little, or I remember a little meditation. I say, I am grateful because these people come to see me. They make it possible for me to make my living in a very agreeable way. I'm going to give them the very best I possibly can. And then, before he goes out on stage, he tells Dale Carnegie, and he stops at the footlights. He says under his breath, I love my audience. I love my audience. And it's showtime. That's gratitude. And they could feel it, and they could see it, and they loved him because he loved them first. It's funny, that had such a big impact on me. I read that years ago, right? And you know what I say every time I come out on stage, before I do a little talk? That. Because you know what? I am super grateful to you. Here's the weirdest thing. It's a snowy night in New Hampshire. I'm making my living right now. This is my job. I get to stand up in front of smart, interested people who love this country and want to make it better, and I get to talk about ways that we can all be happier and lift up America. What's not to like about that? But you know what? If I'm doing it alone in my living room, it's not quite as satisfying, is it? You came to see me. I am deeply grateful to you for that. I'm truly, sincerely grateful to you. I hope you can feel it, because it's true. That is the secret, is the ultimate expression of warm-heartedness. And you can do that today. You can find in the next 24 hours an opportunity to face contempt with that kind of warm-heartedness. You don't have to bring somebody else to your political point of view. You simply have to be the person that expresses him or herself in that way, and you'll see magic happen. So, last thing I want you to think of, and then I'm going to turn it over to you because we have some time for your thoughts. You know, I want you to imagine one thing, because you know, I've noticed, I've been teaching for a long time, that if I can give you an image in your head, you'll remember things better, okay? So here's an image that helps me remember a lot of these things that we're talking about. My wife and I teach a class in marriage preparation for couples that are engaged. You know, I mean, we're not psychologists, but you know, it's about how to communicate, and you know, we've been married for almost 30 years, right? And it's a pretty typical thing. We're Catholic, and Catholics often do that. You know, older couples, younger couples, the whole deal. And it's a Catholic retreat center near our house where we you know, talk to these young couples. 25 to 30 couples a month that we go through. And I noticed one time when we were leaving this retreat center, there was a sign over the door, but it wasn't a sign when you come in. It was a sign when you go out of the retreat center into the parking lot. You know what it said? You are now entering mission territory. I thought to myself, that's not a religious idea. Remember I talked about missionaries, but forget the religious part? That's actually an idea for people who want to share. Okay, so if you're ready to make a better country and be happier and make other people happier and to use the current period of contempt and hatred as an opportunity as opposed to as a challenge, then the way for you to remember it when you leave here tonight, just try to imagine there's a sign over these doors that you are now entering mission territory. Thank you. All right. And I really appreciate all you coming tonight. I can't wait to hear what's on your mind. Yeah, you had it firsthand. Oh, sorry. We gotta wait for the mic because we're taping.
Another book came to mind when you were talking about Dale Carnegie, and that was Robert Fultram's All I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten.
Yeah.
It's kind of that same kind of theme of, you know, sharing, playing well in the sandbox. What has happened that we've not learned those at the beginning? If we're all in this state of contempt, have we simply forgotten those, or we're not learning those from the start?
Well, that's a good question. Is it something that we didn't learn, or is it something that we've forgotten along the way? And you know, in American history, there's kind of there's fluctuations in the way that we treat each other. There's nothing new about a period of contempt. This has happened a bunch of different times, and it's been much, much worse. The whole 19th century was basically a century of contempt. I mean, we forget. I mean, or the late 60s, early 70s. We're talking about this with Tori and Marcia before the talk today. You know, the late 60s. There were 700 domestic bombings in the United States by internal terrorist organizations and people who hated each other so much they were willing to put bombs in public places to blow each other up. We're not even close to that right now. These things actually happen. The way that we get back from these periods of contempt is not that we need kindergarten teachers who are running the country, although, you know, at this point I'll take anything. It's what we need are people remembering their values, and the way that we remember our values is with great and aspirational teachers. In other words, leaders. See, what leaders do is leaders don't impose values. Leaders remind you of your values and call you to your values. That's what great leaders do, right? I haven't taught you anything tonight that you didn't know. Everything I've talked about tonight you already knew, but I helped you to remember it. Now, when I'm teaching a class, I'm giving a lecture on microeconomic theory, I'm teaching people things for the first time. But when I'm talking about how to bring America together, I'm reminding people things that they already know. And that means what we need is leadership that brings us back. Here's the good news. It's coming. It's coming. Because we are in a deep political disequilibrium in this country. Misery won't last. People don't like it and are not going to put up with it. And the thing that we're about to find is, I don't know when, I don't know which party or when, but I think sooner than we think, we're going to see people emerging who have the love your enemies theme. By the way, if you like this and you want to learn more about this, this is a little talk about a book that's coming out March 12th called Love Your Enemies. All these ideas and more. It's a how-to guide, step by step by step by step. I wrote it for leaders on how leaders can be more uniting, can be more harmonious, can bring us actually together. Here's the best part. There's a chapter booklet out front that has the first chapter of the book. And if you want, our donors, every time I go on a college campus, they send me with these things, and there's a coupon in the back. Send it in. They'll send you a free book. Don't even buy it. But here's the deal. If you get that, you have to do what's in the book. Here's my deal. I need you to actually love your enemies. Here's the trick. Martin Luther King said, when you love your enemies, you realize they weren't your enemies after all. But anyway, that's getting ahead of myself. So that's the key thing. No, we didn't not learn these things. We learned these things. We forgot them. And we need people to remind us. Leaders. Who are the leaders? You. Yes, sir, and then we'll go back here.
Great, excellent message, much needed.
Thank you, sir.
I've been thinking about the family dinner, the family meetings, the Thanksgiving, and how we've gotten to a point now where people are either avoiding those, either not going, or it's like the third rail to talk about politics, and people need the tools to be able to have those kind of conversations. Because the last thing we need is no conversations.
Yeah.
I think that only is making it worse. And I don't know if you would add anything about that.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. I have this podcast that, and the first season, which is finished, the second season about love, and it's kicking off on February 14th, appropriately. The first season, which was in 2018, was about the art of disagreement. And we had psychologists on that were talking about exactly how to deal with this problem. I had a whole bunch of people who are specialists in family dynamics. John Gottman himself was on the podcast. So go back and listen to the John Gottman episode, or any of them for that matter. And they do indeed say that the worst thing that you can do is take somebody you love and treat the person with contempt. The second worst thing that you can do is not communicate. The key thing really starts with the way that we listen. I mean, when you think about it, there's nothing that's that worth getting angry about. I mean, the worst case scenario is that somebody you love thinks something you don't think is right. Well, all right. I mean, why do you get so worked up about that? Right? It's not like they say, I think you should die. You're unlikely. And look, I'm sure that has been stated at Thanksgiving dinners throughout history, but it's not usually what we hear. We have to remember and keep our priorities in order, even if we strongly disagree. Look, I hear things at Thanksgiving dinner that I strongly disagree with. It's okay. It's okay. The key is listening with love, listening with a spirit of warm-heartedness and with openness. That's the key. It's like, why do you think that? Oh, that's interesting. So, and then, there's a whole protocol. You're getting this. It's interesting. I learned from these psychologists in the course of doing the podcast. The whole protocol is, number one, is making sure that the other person understands that you heard what the person said by talking back, by telling the person, so you're saying this and this and this. So, look, am I correct that what you really care about is, and then state the moral purpose, which, by the way, you share. We virtually all share the core moral purposes. Say, okay, I got it. You know what worries me? And then give your point of view. Give your point of view with gentleness and with love and in a spirit of a gift. I want you to hear my point of view because I care about you. I want you to hear it. You don't freeze them out under the circumstances. And so it takes skill, right? The battering ram is a lot easier. But there are ways to do it. And all of this stuff, again, in this book, it charts it out chapter and verse. Do this, then do this, and do this. At a certain point, if you got a couple that's on the rocks, you got to give them instructions on how to get off the rocks. And if that's your Thanksgiving dinner, follow the instructions. And it'll go better. It'll go better. Thank you for that. All right, who's next? Next. We'll come back on this side. Yes, ma'am. And then we'll go here, and then we'll go back to Rose. Yeah.
Well, thank you for the talk.
Thanks.
You open it by talking about people who have become successful or famous by responding to contempt with further contempt. And then you also say that the way to achieve personal happiness is through practicing warm-heartedness and responding to hate with more love. Do you think, also, people like that, when I speak to them, they're a real minority. Do you think that in a world that rewards kind of selfishness or contempt behavior, that people who are truly have inner happiness, that they can also be successful?
Yeah. Actually, I'm quite sure that people who have a sense of peace, that people who have a sense of love can be incredibly successful. That's a different brand, isn't it? I mean, that people want to be around warm-hearted people. People will take the contemptuous, but the longer play is love. That's the long term. In the long term, that's what people actually want. Again, if you want a super fast burn, one of the things I write an awful lot about is different models of leaders. Okay, and there's a guy who teaches at HBS, at Harvard Business School, named Daniel Goleman. And he does work on he does two different kinds of leaders in particular, coercive leaders and authoritative leaders. Coercive leaders are bullies. They're contemptuous. And they can be super successful, but they burn out really fast because people don't like them. Then there are authoritative leaders who have to be more skillful, and they have to be in a really, really long play. They have to basically be disciplined about their kindness and about the way that they bring people into the mission, right? So look, if you've got no chops and no skill, just scream a whole bunch and get famous really, really fast. But you're gonna fall. You're gonna be in trouble. People will stand up to bullies. Bullies always end poorly. At the end of the day, they always end poorly. The people who are in for the long play can be unbelievably successful and indeed more successful. Now, sometimes it takes a really, really long time. It's interesting, you know, I was just looking at, you know, all these examples of people who were loving and warm-hearted and harmonious and called people to, Dr. Martin Luther King, right? When he died, he had a 33% favorability rating when he was assassinated. Today's 95%. That's a super long play. I mean, that's like, you know, 60 years or so, 50 years or 60 years or something after you die. That's kind of long, right? It's good, but he didn't get the satisfaction from that. But at the end, you know, what goes around comes around. You absolutely can. You must. There's no other way. Yeah, you'll win.
Can you give us sort of the next step, like if we can work on our individual gratitude and compassion and kindness, how do we help bring a community together that is being divided in these times? How do we have a meeting in our home of strangers and start discussing these issues so that people are listening to each other? Because I've wrestled with that and tried to do it, and it's tricky.
Yeah, it's really tricky. And you're in New Hampshire, so it's going to get worse because all the presidential candidates are coming through soon. They're probably already here. How many of you are running for president? Half the hands go up. So, oh, you know. I put on social media, you know, I'm in Hanover, New Hampshire, 0 degrees or something this morning, something stupid on my Twitter feed. And the first thing I get back is, he's running. Like, you got to be careful. Like, tomorrow I'm going to Iowa. No. Okay, so the key principle of uniting people around a set of ideas is personal magnetism. Okay, the first thing is drawing people to you, as opposed to compelling people to doing something. You will find that people want to be around you. When you are, like some people will be repelled by it because they want the fun. You know, they're the hate mongers. They're gonna like, she's no good. But most people are going to be compelled to be. It's like there's something, there's personal magnetism about that. Second is when you actually try to bring people together around this particular purpose, there's ground rules that you can set up, but there's also protocols that you can follow. One of the really interesting things is if you actually if you bring people together who disagree, and you start on a topic that brings up love among them mutually, it's very difficult to knock them off the love frame. So for example, if you talk about, before we start this whole thing, like we all disagree on all kinds of stuff, right? We all disagree. But I want you to talk about 3 things you're really grateful for in this country today. Now, not 3 things you're really mad about, 3 things that are really driving you crazy. Tell me 3 things you're really grateful for in this country. And you basically start by overtly stating gratitude. It'll be really, really difficult for people to wreck that meeting. Somebody can. Potentially, but that's one of the things I strongly recommend. The second thing that you can do is basically say, what we are trying to find is not to agree. What we are trying to find is a way that we can listen to each other with love. If you set that as a ground rule, it's very interesting. That's how cultures of companies actually come about. You know, in AEI, we're not perfect, but we have 300 full-time employees in my think tank. I've been president of this place for 10.5 years. And you know, one of the things that we're not perfect, lots of stuff is screwed up, you know, we make mistakes, the whole thing. But the thing that's great is that people are super nice to each other. We don't agree on anything. You know, these are scholars, like a college faculty. You got 6 college faculty, you're gonna have 25 opinions. It's normal, right? But everybody's super respectful and super nice to each other because we have kind of moral ground rules. It's not cool to be a jerk at AEI. And furthermore, it's unproductive to be a jerk at AEI. So setting up that, so magnetism, right? Protocols and ground rules. And if you do that, you will find a lot of good things happen. Right here in the back, ma'am, and then we'll come right up here. Yeah.
I'm sure you're familiar with linguistic programming, and I'm wondering if you think there's any parallel with your approach.
Neuro-linguistic programming is that where you ask people to state particular phrases and phraseology, and in so doing, you basically imprint ideas and ways of thinking on the brain. Yeah, I mean, that is a lot of what I'm talking about here. It's amazing how self-talk, how important it is. You know, when you basically, one of the things I talk about an awful lot in the book is how the mistake that we make is thinking that action follows attitude. If I feel a certain way, then I act a particular way. That's pretty much backward from reality. You can change your attitude by your action. And so one of the things that I recommend to people is when you don't feel grateful, act grateful. Fake gratitude. And you'll start feeling grateful. It's really crazy. And part of this is how cognitive behavioral therapy has treated people who are depressed over the years. You know, one of the things that I find really remarkable is that cognitive behavioral therapy, in case of the depression, one of the pieces of advice that they would give people who are really depressed is to pretend they're not depressed. Act like non-depressed people act. Get up, normal time, take off your pajamas, shave, if you're a man, go out of the house, talk to somebody. You could be just really, really depressed. But when you act this way, why? By the way, there's a lot of this neurological research that shows that you will illuminate the part of the prefrontal cortex that's more active in non-depressed people by simply mimicking non-depressed people. This is key. There's a whole area of research. There's a French physiologist in the late 19th century named Duchenne, who mapped out the human smile, finding that there are 19 types of human smiles all around the world. And it's not culturally determined. It's physiological. It's human. And there's only one of those smiles that's associated with true human happiness. It's called the Duchenne smile, after him. It's so awesome. The only happy smile that's got your name on it. It's great. It's like the Brooks Family Lecture. But even happier. All right, so the Duchenne smile, what is it? How can you tell if somebody's happy? Not by the mouth, but the eyes. Because the corners of the eyes crinkle up. When you see somebody who's 90 and who has really pronounced crow's feet, like that's the person to go hang out with, because that's the person who's been smiling a Duchenne smile a lot. Your goal is crow's feet, right? Okay, so if you want to feel happier, here's the interesting stuff. Work from the 1990s as opposed to the 1890s did work on the Duchenne smile and found that when you stimulate it, and the way to stimulate it, by the way, is actually holding a pencil outward in your mouth and smiling while you hold a pencil in, that will involuntarily crinkle up the corners of your eyes. You start feeling happier. So it's the happy smile brings happiness. It's not just that the happiness brings the happy smile. There's lots of stuff in this. Talk like happy people, talk like grateful people, express yourself, look like what people do when they're acting warm-hearted, and soon enough, you're gonna be a different person. That's the bottom line. And I have re-engineered myself using this. I've changed my life using these principles. Who's next? Yeah, right here, yeah.
Hello again.
Hey.
Thank you so much for coming to speak with us today.
Thanks.
I think I was a little bit saddened to think of how easily it was to come up with a list in my mind of the type of people who capitalize on our feelings of contempt. And so I'm wondering if you could help me construct another list in my mind with some people who serve as models of this behavior of gratitude and kind-heartedness in today's world.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that an awful lot. The good news is really, in a weird way, that's an easier model to come up with, an easier list to come up with, because these are people around you that you respect and admire, right? You actually, even if you agree with somebody who's on cable TV, who's firing people up and creating a lot of hate, you might like it. Your favorite columnist who says the other side is stupid and evil, you might be like, yeah. But you don't actually admire it in its way. But there are professors that you have that you admire. There are people that you actually see in public life. There are historical figures that you admire. You know, Doris Kearns Goodwin has this really beautiful new book called Leadership. And she talks about people who have, just through sheer aspiration, have been able to do two things: lift people up and bring them together. You read that and you go, wow, that's a good list. There are lots of people like that. Who are these people? These are people who did the long-term work, who did, stayed at it all these years. And here's the best part. You learn about those people. You read the profiles of the people who've gotten very famous doing it, or the people around you that are not famous, but nonetheless are leaders in their world who display these characteristics. And you can learn how you can be on that list too. At the end of the day, which list do you want to be on, right? The list of the people that you admire, the list of the people that you don't. And what I would recommend as your fourth homework assignment, therefore, is you made your hate listers, make your love listers too, and the people that you want to emulate more. And then help and pray that you're on somebody else's list. Right back here in blue shirt, and then we'll come back up in front. Yeah.
Yeah, so you talked a little bit about like re-engineering yourself and sort of like different phases of your life, and I'm curious especially about like the music one.
Yeah.
And how that relates to who you are today and your kind of thoughts on that.
Thank you. Are you a musician?
No, tone deaf.
You like music though, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So thanks for asking that. You know, it had a huge impact on what I do, but in a weird way. So Europeans always think that we're nuts because we all have these weird aspirations and ambitions in the United States. When I was 9 years old, I decided I was going to be the world's greatest French horn player. Like, weird, right? I literally had pictures of famous French horn players in my room for inspiration. I practiced hours a day. It was all I wanted to do. I didn't care about anything else except classical music and playing the French horn. I did it all the way through high school. I mean, I was just single-mindedly focused. When I was 19, I left college under pretty dubious circumstances. But I went, you know, dropped out, kicked out, splitting hairs. And, and you know, I went on the road playing the French horn, right? And, you know, I got to my late 20s. And by this time I was in the Barcelona Symphony, Barcelona, Spain. I was married. A lot of my life was really, really happy, but I wasn't happy in my work, and I couldn't figure out why. And then I figured it out. Here's how I figured it out. I was reading a biography of my favorite composer, Johann Sebastian Bach. Some of you love Bach. Maybe you don't know anything about classical music, you know Bach, right? Everybody knows Bach, right? And here's what I knew his music, but I didn't know anything about him. In Bach's biography, you know, this is recorded by a biographer who's relatively lost to history. The question was, why do you write music? You know, you're all successful in your lives, in your work, in your studies. And people ask you, what do you do? Well, I'm a student at Dartmouth College. Fantastic, right? I have a business. I sell real estate. I've done great, right? Nobody ever asks you, why do you do what you do? The Bach question. Why do you do what you do? Do you have an answer? Do you actually have an answer about why you're doing what you're doing? You need an answer because that's the moral purpose of your life. Everything else is just a list of products. How boring. And so Bach was asked, why do you write music? Here's his answer. The aim and final end of all music is nothing less than the glorification of God and the refreshment of the soul. I thought to myself, yeah, that's it. But it was like a knife to the heart because I couldn't say that. Look, if you're not a religious person, don't be distracted. Bach is saying that the purpose of your work is serving others. If it's not, you're wasting your life. That's Bach. And I wasn't. So you know what? I left music. Bach made me into an economist. It's so crazy, you know? I mean, it's like from the sublime to the dismal. Because I wanted to find something where I could serve, where I could actually serve. And it's for the longest time, you know, I left music when I was 31 years old, and I went to graduate school and the whole thing. And I kind of felt like I'd failed, and I didn't talk about it for a long time. But you know where that led? It led to here, tonight. Talking to you about these types of things, which I never would have been able to do before. What music did is it gave me a discipline and a sense of excellence and appreciation of truth and beauty and how close these things are to each other. And most importantly, my favorite composer taught me how important it is that I use all of my work and all of my endeavor to serve other people. And that brought me to where I am today. And that really, I think, made me the man who I am today. Thank you for that. That's a wonderful question. I appreciate it a lot. All right, who's next? Yes, sir. Got a mic next to you.
Yes, I'd like to, you've been a lot in the abstract.
Yeah.
And I'd like to move a little bit maybe more to walk us through something very practical, and we'll take some hot topic, hot button topic, we'll say abortion against non-abortion. So how are two people going to deal with that without getting in each other's face?
Okay, so this happens a lot, right? And your first alternative is just to either avoid it or treat each other with contempt, throw bombs, and walk off, right? Those are the two things. But we already established that that's not the best way to conduct your Thanksgiving dinner. So how do you actually deal with it under the circumstances? First thing to realize is because somebody disagrees with you on this does not make that person automatically horrible. Can you cross that Rubicon to say that? A lot of people can't yet. How do you do that? By establishing that we share a lot of moral principles. We share that they're manifest in very different ways. The other thing is to recognize that it's incredibly impractical to try to insult somebody else into agreement. If you want somebody to appreciate your point of view, God forbid, share your point of view, insulting that person is a self-defeating strategy. So as a practical matter and as a realistic matter, you have to start looking for some of the moral principles that we have in common. One of the ways that I do when I adjudicate what are these marital disputes and ideological debates along these lines, is I ask people to state the other person's moral point of view. I want you to say what that other person actually believes. And what they'll almost always do is caricature it and talk about it. Well, it's like, this person thinks that, you know, they don't really care that much about the lives of babies. Well, it's like, I'm sorry, that's not their moral point of view. Try again. Try again. And so what I'm doing is bringing people together is to get them to state each other's moral point of view in terms that are as charitable as possible. Let's say now that you don't have a marriage counselor like me in the room. How do you do it? Find how you can most charitably state the other person's point of view. What can I do that is not ad hominem, that doesn't caricature, that doesn't actually display bitterness? And when that person says, yes, that actually is my point of view, you will find that you have the beginnings of some shared moral experience. And from shared moral experience, you can agree to disagree on a lot without hating each other as people. There's tons of stuff that we're not going to agree on in this country. That's perfectly fine to not agree on all kinds of stuff as a country. No problem. Under the circumstances. We can run a democracy without deciding if pro-life people and pro-choice people don't come together on that issue. We can go decade after decade after decade without deciding on that issue and still have a successful democracy. What we can't have is a happy country where we're actually making progress as long as one side says that the other side is evil under the circumstance, and that's what we have to defeat. So those are the ways that I actually go about doing that. Now, what I ordinarily do is I'm most critical of people who have my point of view on that issue, who are caricaturing the other side. Why? Because of the moral principle that we talked about before, which is standing up to your own side on behalf of people on the other side. And that's a very tricky thing to do as well. But I've done it, and I did it just recently in university. I was in Furman University in South Carolina, and we had a whole big debate exchange on the internet of where somebody who had my point of view on that issue was caricaturing in a very destructive and a very wrong-headed way because it wasn't actually characteristic of the other person's true point of view. It was the cartoon version of it, which meant that the debate was impossible from the first principles. That's how I cope with it. I mean, it's like, and guess what? We won't agree. And guess what else? That's okay. Andrew.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks.
I'm going to try to react to supply-side fanatics as warm-heartedly as I can. But if they refuse to abide by the principles that you've laid out, how do I actually get them to stop spending the next generation's money? How do I do that?
Well, you know, we have to, when somebody is actually doing something in public policy you think is very, very destructive, in a democracy where we have a vibrant civil society and we're not on the brink of civil war, you have to create a coalition of people who agree with you, and you have to win politically. That doesn't mean you have to insult the people who disagree with you. You don't have to be bitter or contemptuous of the people who disagree with you, but you have to get more people who agree with you. Okay, now this is a really interesting thing from my point of view. Look, so I run this think tank. This think tank is based on two moral principles: the equality of human dignity and the limitlessness of human potential. And I strongly believe that the American free enterprise system is really good for those goals. Really good. Best system we've ever, you and I agree on this, best system we've ever come up with to serve those goals, right? Okay, so I'm thinking to myself, how do I get more people to agree with me? Because I'm not going to beat other people into submission. I'm not going to insult other people into agreement. I need more people to follow me. You believe this is a MIT-trained public finance economist. You're right. You need more people to follow you. How are you going to do it? Okay, well, the world is made up on supply-side economics of four groups. Okay, I'm not going to talk about supply-side economics. I'm going to talk about marketing now. Okay? Group number one, the true believers, the Andrews, who agree with your point of view. Think you're right and smart and good-looking. Okay? Group number two, the persuadables. I'm willing to listen. I don't know. What is supply-side economics? I'm kind of interested. Your students. Group number three, the hostiles. Andrew's wrong. Andrew's stupid. Andrew's evil. And the apathetics, which is 99.9% of the population. They don't know. They don't care. They're trying to get to a soccer practice or a choir rehearsal or get dinner on the table. Supply-side economics, boring. Okay, so what do we want to do? You feel strongly about this because you got the data and your cause is just. You can just fire up the true believers all day long and try to, through sheer power politics, to get a coalition of people together and vanquish the other side utterly. Bad, bad move. That's what we're doing in America today. And you see how great it is. We all love each other and everything's fine and harmonious, right? Just like, ugh. Okay, what's a better way to do it? To improve the true believers, making them better, making them more effective, making them more winsome, right? By giving them better points of view. What do you do with the persuadables? You persuade them. How do you persuade persuadables? Here's the magic. You go to the hostiles and treat them with love and respect, and the persuadables will see it. This is the biggest, like the scales fell from my eyes when I became the president of AEI. I realized through trial and error and making lots of mistakes that when I actually went places where I was not invited and said things that people don't expect, that the persuadables were watching, and that's when I got converse to what I think is good and true and just. It's weird. It's like I write for the Washington Post. And before that, I wrote for the New York Times. I don't do it because I think that people are going to be super nice to me in the comments section, because I could write a column called "I Love Puppies," and I would be denounced as a fascist in the comments section of these newspapers, right? I do it because when I'm going places where people disagree with my point of view about capitalism, about free enterprise, about lifting people up through these means, and I do it with love and respect, and I confront people who are hostile, and I say, look, I got your point of view. You care about the poor. I love that. I think I have a better way of doing it. Persuadables come along, and that's how you actually bring more people to your cause, and peacefully and democratically and respectfully, you actually can win the day. What was next? That was a long marketing answer. Yes, sir, right in the back.
I hope I can say this in a fashion that it's understood. I hear what you say, and I agree with you 100%. Since modern industry has come into being, the Fortune 500 have had retreats every year in the thousands. Every retreat has someone who deals with interpersonal relationships. And yet, from my own personal perspective, and I was involved with that too, because I was in industry my whole career. My own personal perspective is that the situation hasn't improved one iota. In fact, it's gotten worse. I think that in addition or in conjunction with what you are promoting on an individual basis, there is something that we can do that's going to have a much more profound impact. And that is that if we take up the root cause of why some of these things exist. And essentially that root cause is education. When we have a system of school districts where there's a disparity in the contributions of money to students, you're going to have a huge disparity in the ability of the people in some categories to really understand what's going on their own without having any kind of interpersonal relationship. So I personally would rather concentrate my effort on trying to promote something like education for everyone so that we learn and teach respect. We don't worry too much about integration because I think that's just a lost cause. But we teach respect and we teach people to be able to think somewhat critically. If we can get to the point where the majority of our people here in this country think that way, then I think we can make a major contribution. Until then, I think what you are promoting is ideal, but I don't think it's going to have a huge, huge impact on the final results that we're trying to achieve.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that, sir. It is absolutely true that we need an education system that's not just uniform, but one that actually treats, that teaches principles of ethical citizenship and respect. I mean, and that's not what we do today. I mean, it's extraordinary. Actually, we're going in the other direction from what we do today. Where would I start that? If I can only, if worldwide, universally, that'd be great. If I can't do that, where do I want to look? I want to look at the most likely next generation of leaders. And I'm looking here. This is one of the great colleges in this country. To what extent is it promoting the principles of universal solidarity, of ideological diversity, of respect and love for people who disagree? Pretty good, but it could always be better. I mean, this is why this is so important. Well, this is like the Brooks Family Lecture. You're bringing people like me here. But to what extent can this college actually be a beacon of bringing people together who disagree in a very constructive and a very public way, and in so doing, teach the next, how many students are here? 5,000, 6,000 students. The next 6,000 students who are going to be leaders in industry, leaders in politics, leaders in the nonprofit sector, leaders in government, that this is the right ethos, that this is the right culture, that this is actually the future of the country. The extent that we can dedicate a place like this to that, then at very least, we're trying to get some leverage. Thank you for that. All right. It looks like we're just about out of time, and I hear it's still snowing outside. So I hope that you have a safe drive home, and you'll give these things some thought. If you do want a copy of the book, send in that little card, and we'll send you a book. Delighted to. If you want, I'll even sign it. But the last thing I'd like you to do is to join me in thanking the Brooks family for making this evening possible.